When we learned the song Star-Spangled Banner, we saw that there were secondary dominant chords in there that I mentioned but didn't teach about. We'll return to that idea now. We've learned from the start that the major scale is made up of the steps whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half. This is also tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. The root, then we go up from there, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and back to the root. Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, or 1 again. In C, that's C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. We've been playing that from the start. Root, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, 7, root. We learned all of the chords that go with each of those notes. The root note is C, and we get a major chord built on that. C major. The fourth note is F. On the F note, we can build a major chord, the 4 chord. And on the fifth, we have G. We can build another major chord on G. So in every key, based upon the whole steps and half steps, we get a major chord on 1, 4, and 5. C, F, G in the key of C. You've learned that those are called the primary chords. The 1 is tonic, the 4 is subdominant, the 5 is the dominant chord, that's the important one today, and back to the 1, the tonic. So if we've only done the 1, 4, and 5 there and called them the primary chords, then the 2, 3, 6, and 7 would be the secondary chords. We've learned many times that the 6 is the relative minor. Here's C to A minor, it's relative minor. C is major, D, the chord built on the second note, is going to be minor, and so is the E minor. So 2 and 3 are minor. Here's C major, 2 minor, the D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, the relative minor. We can do a B diminished chord, the 7. That's just a small one, and the C. So if we stay in the key, it's called playing diatonically. We are diatonic to the major scale, and the chords are major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, and then the root again at the end is major. Major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, major. We've seen that before in several keys when we worked on our scale tone triads. We've also looked at adding the 7 to each. The C chord, the 1, has a major 7. It's a lush, jazzy sound. The 2 chord is D minor 7. It's a minor chord with a minor 7 or a flat 7. E minor, the 3 chord, is a minor chord with a minor or flat 7. The 4 chord is F major 7. Its 7 encounters the other half step in the scale, so it's a major 7. The G chord is the dominant chord. It's the 5, and it's a major chord, but it has a flat or minor 7. Because the 7th note is F, and F is a whole step below G, it's only a minor 7th above G. And that chord wants to lead back to the root. As I climbed up alphabetically, I actually had to stop at the 5 and go back to the root just to satisfy my ear. Here they are again. C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7, G7, which makes you want to get back to 1. In doing so, I've skipped a couple of chords. I'll go back and get the A minor 7, and the B chord is a half diminished 7. It's got a lot of tension and lands you back on the root. The chord in question today is that 5 chord, the dominant 7. In every key, we use the dominant 7 on the 5 to get back to the root. So here's C, F, G7, and that wants to move you back. It's got a tritone in it. We won't talk about that today, but it's this very dissonant interval that creates a lot of tension that pushes us back to the key note, the C. Then what we did over and over and over again was we learned that if we've done primary chords in the key of C, our next key would be the key of G. We'd go to the key of the dominant and make its primary chords. Using the same patterns, the whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, we get another major scale on G. It'll only have one note different from the key of C. It has an F sharp. That's reflected in its 5 chord, the D7. So the 1, 4, 5 in G would be G, C, the 4 chord now, D7 is its 5, and D7 leads you to G. D7 has the leading tone that put us in the key of G, the F sharp, and that leads you back to the chord tone, the tonic G. If I go to the next key, that would be the key of the dominant chord, the D. So it becomes a 1 chord. Its 4 and 5 are now G and A7. D has an F sharp in it. The A chord or A7 chord has the C sharp. That's the note that distinguishes it from the key of G. The C sharp on the A chord is the leading tone that leads us to the D tonic. So here's D, G, and A, primary chords in D. A7 here, leading tone, back to D. So A7s lead to Ds. One more time, I'll go to one more key. I'll take that dominant chord, the A. It's got the most similar scale to D other than the key of G. We had G and a very similar scale was D, so we went into the key of D. So those two are similar. Now we go to the key of the 5th, the A, which is just as similar to D, having only one more sharp. The D comes into that key with 1 sharp, the F. The A has the C sharp, and its new chord, this E or E7, has the G sharp. So it's got 3 sharps, F sharp, C sharp, and G sharp. It's only 1 sharp more than the key of D had, which was 1 sharp more than the key of G. In A, the primary chords, you've memorized these, 1, 4, 5. A, D, E, or E7 to A. Here's A, E7, with the G sharp leading tone, leading you back to A. What we've learned then is the dominant 7 can accompany every one of those tonic notes. A to E7 to A. E7s lead back to A's. D to its 5, the A7, and back to D again. That's 1, 5, 1. G to its dominant 7, the D7, back to G. And our original key, C, with its 5 chord dominant 7, G7, back to C. So normal progression, we saw, would have C's and D minors, E minors, F's, G's or G7s, and A minors. But now we've also seen that A's can be preceded by their own 5s. The E7s will lead back to A's. D's can be preceded by their own 5s, the A7s, and so on. In one of our first songs, we saw Au Clair de la Lune, we learned the chords. We played C, C and G7. That G7 leads you back to C, to G7, back to C. We repeated that, and then we had an entire line with D7s. That D7 does not belong in the key of C. D is a secondary chord, it's minor, but they're putting in a D7 because it's the 5-7 chord that leads to the G7 coming up, which leads to the C. So we're descending fifths. We've got the 5 of G leading to the G, but G is the 5 of C leading you home to C. So we're creating a cycle of descending fifths here. We've gone out of key to get the dominant chord for G. That leads you to the G, which is the dominant chord in the key, which leads you to C. The D7 is borrowed from the key of G, where Fs are sharp. So we have a note out of key, and this is a secondary dominant chord. It's the dominant of G, but it's not the proper dominant of this key. It was a secondary chord, which has been turned into a dominant 7. So here in a nutshell would be those chords. I won't play the entire song. C, G7, C. Out of key, D7. Lots of tension to the G7. Back to C. We ran into the exact same chord in Oralee. We have C's, G7s, and C's. In between, we have a D7 that leads to the G7. Every time I hit that D7, you can hear we're out of key. We've added an F sharp note, which is from the key of G. This is the secondary dominant chord. It brought a leading tone that leads you to the G, which fades down to an F in the G7, which leads you to the C. Here's the C chord, D chord, leading you to G, back to C. That repeats. The next section has an A minor, the relative minor, the sixth chord that we know well. But it has an E7 right before the A minor. Well, E's are the three chords. They're secondary chords and they should be minor. How come this one's a 7? Because it's the 5 of A minor. You go back to your cycle, E7s are the 5s that lead to A minors. So we can bring them into this key to get you back to A. Here's that line then, C, E7. You can hear a Tin Pan Alley jazzy sound on that. Here's C again. Raising into an E7, secondary dominant, which resolves to the A minor. Back to an E, which sounds like it's leading back to A minors again, but then we resolve and finish off on C's. D7s and G's. So twice we went out of key here. Once the D7, the 5 chord of G, the secondary dominant, led you to G7s, which lead you to C's. And then when we want to get to an A minor, the A brought along its own secondary dominant. This is its 5, which leads us back to A's. This brings us to Star-Spangled Banner, where we encountered this in our last lesson and discussed it. If I looked at all the chords of this key and did them diatonically, I'd have C's and G's, A minors, E minors, D minors, F's, G's, G7 if I like, and C. In the first line, we go C to G, to A minor, to E7. Just like we heard in Oralee, this is the 5 of an A minor. So this is a secondary dominant. It's got a G sharp note in it that leads you to the A minors. The A minor goes to a D7. D was supposed to be minor in this key. The second chord is a secondary minor, but it's a dominant 7 again because it's the 5 of the G, with the leading tone pushing you to the G, which pushes you home to C. Here's that first line, C, G, A minor, E7, A minor, D7, G. Next line's very diatonic, very normal. C, G, F, C, C. This G sets up a repeat of the first line. Listen here as you hear us going out of key again. Last line of that section is a repeat of the second line. Diatonic chords C, the 5, the G, 4, the F, C tonic. The next section is mostly diatonic, C chord, G7. Next line, C, G to F, C, A minor, D7, G. The D7 is the 5 of G. We have a cycle of descending fifths there again. A minor goes down 5 to D7. In key it would have been D minor, but it's a secondary dominant leading to G. In the next line we go C and F. F wants to get to a D minor, the 2 chord, and it sticks a secondary dominant of D in there. D secondary dominant, D, E, F, G, A is an A7. So here's F, pushing up into A7. Oh wow, you can really hear that bluesy out of key feel onto the D minor, which wraps up with C's and G's. That line again with the A7 sticking in it. The previous line had an A minor and then a D7. Here's F, C, A minor, that's the right chord, the secondary, dominant on the D to G. Next line, C, F, the A minor becomes A7, secondary dominant to D minor. And the last line is diatonic. C to G7, C to A minor, C to G7, the big 5 chord ending you, bringing you home in a cadence to the C. One more interesting thing about this, I was emphasizing that the secondary dominants keep bringing in notes from outside the key. The key of C has no sharps. The D7 is the 5 in G. G has 1 sharp, so that's in the D7. That D7 chord has an F sharp note. The A7 comes from the key of D, where they're both F sharps and C sharps, so it introduces a C sharp to the key. The E7 comes from the key of A, where there's F sharp, C sharp, and G sharp, so it will introduce a G sharp to the key. Here's the E7 with a G sharp, leading to an A7 with a C sharp, leading to a D7 with an F sharp, back home to the G7 chord, which is back in key, which lands you on C. You can listen to this. I think of this as a slinky effect. I'm playing on the floor with C's, F's, and G's. And then you take this slinky and stick it up like 4 steps higher. And you can hear when I go to E7, I've got all this tension of a raised level. I'm up the stairs. But then it starts falling down the stairs. E7 slinkies down to A7, which slinkies down to D7, slinkies down to the second to last stair G7, slinkies down to the floor. C, E, A, D7, G7, C. So when we got that F sharp note that came with the D7 chord, it was actually reflected in the melody of Star-Spangled Banner, one of our first accidentals in this book. We've seen F sharps before, but they were used to introduce us to the key of G. In Star-Spangled Banner, the F sharp shows up right here, out of key, because it's pushing you up to the G note of the G chord. The F sharp's in a D7 chord, pushing you to a G chord. So the accidental is reflected in the chord, or the chord has introduced the accidental. Here's that line again. E major, D7, G7, back to G. E7. Normal A minor. G7. Just for a point of note, a few times I would say I was on E7 or D7 when structuring the chord on guitar to get the melody. I couldn't actually put the 7 in there, but you could always hear the major quality anyway. So that's your secondary dominants. I hope that makes sense. See you guys later. Bye.